Alright, this is my review for Animorphs Book 1 The Invasion, written by Catherine K.A. Applegate. This review is going to be the start of me revisiting the entire series, so without further ado, let's begin. The first words we see are, "My name is Jake." We're not given a last name or anything. We'll soon find out why. We're introduced to Jake, sometimes referred to as Big Jake because he looks older than he actually is, and his best friend Marco, the funny one. We then meet Tobias, a kid Jake saved from being bullied a while ago. He's hung around him ever since. We're then introduced to Jake's cousin Rachel and her best friend Cassie shortly afterwards. It's made pretty obvious that Jake has a crush on Cassie, and it's implied that she feels the same way. And because it's nighttime, Jake offers to walk the girls home, and Rachel gets unreasonably offended by this proposition. This one's gonna get on my nerves, I can tell. Her Brat meter is already at 1%. Not the best first impression. After Cassie diffuses the situation, all five of them begin to walk home, and they take a shortcut through a nearby construction site. Tobias notices a fast-moving white light in the sky. As it comes closer, it's revealed to be a spaceship of some kind. The ship lands, and we're introduced to Prince Elfangor. Elfangor is an Andalite, a race of blue alien centaurs with scorpion tails and stalk eyes. They have no mouths and communicate using thought speak. It's pretty much a way of telepathically projecting words into someone's head. Elfangor has a large, scorched hole in his side. He says the wound is fatal, and he begins to tell the kids that a group of aliens called the Yeerks are in the process of invading the Earth. The Yeerks are parasites that burrow their way into the brain of its host through the ear canal. Once inside, they can control every move the host makes. Those under Yeerk control are referred to as controllers. They travel in ships called bug fighters and are often accompanied by a much larger spacecraft that resembles a battle axe called the Blade Ship. Most controllers usually carry Dracon beams, which are pretty much alien ray guns. Z-Space is briefly mentioned as well. Elfangor says that more Andalites might be on their way to Earth, but that could take a year at the very least. Aside from that, there's nothing they can do to stop the Yeerks. That is until Elfangor tells them to go inside his ship and get a blue cube. Jake, in his attempt to impress Cassie, volunteers to go aboard the ship. After he brings out the blue cube, Elfangor tells them that he could probably help them by giving them the power to morph into any animal by acquiring their DNA through touch first. With bug fighters and the Blade Ship quickly closing in on them, they all agree to accept the Andalite's gift. No pun intended. After putting each of their hands on one side of the cube, a pleasurable shock is sent through their fingers. And just like that, they all have morphing powers. Elfangor warns them to never stay in a morph for more than 2 Earth hours or it'll be permanent. The bug fighters land alongside the Blade Ship. The Blade Ship's door opens, and out come the Hork-Bajir, a race of 7-foot reptilian humanoids complete with horns, T-Rex feet, long tails, bird beaks, serpentine necks, and organic razor blade-like protrusions. Most of the Hork-Bajir are involuntary controllers. They were peaceful creatures before the Yeerks got a hold of them. They tend to speak a mixture of English and their own language, which sounds like gibberish. Then we meet the Taxxons, a race of enormous, foul-smelling, insectoid aliens that are always hungry. Pretty much like Mongolian death worms from outer space. The Taxxons all became controllers voluntarily. We also see a few human controllers. Jake can't see them clearly, but he notices a few of them sound familiar. We then get introduced to the main antagonist of the entire series, Visser 3. The only Yeerk to possess an Andalite body, and the only controller that currently has the power to morph. After taunting Elfangor, he slashes Visser 3 with his tail blade, wounding him. This angers Visser 3, so then he slowly morphs into a large tentacled creature with razor-sharp teeth known as an Antarian bog. He lifts Elfangor up and eats him in a pretty gruesome fashion, effectively setting the tone for the rest of the series going forward. I actually felt bad for him. When Visser 3 reverts back to his Andalite form, the wound Elfangor gave him has been completely healed by the morphing process. The kids eventually get spotted by the Hork-Bajir controllers and they run. After splitting up, Jake briefly encounters a nearby homeless man. Jake tries to warn him, but with Hork-Bajir controllers closing in, he's forced to continue running. We never see the homeless man again, though it's heavily implied that he may have died, given that earlier conversations indicated the controllers intended on bringing back the heads of any witnesses. Jake somehow manages to make it home and meets up with the others. The next morning, Tobias stops by Jake's house and demonstrates how he is now able to morph into his cat named Dude after acquiring him. Tobias communicates with Jake using thought speak, just like Elfangor, proving that they can use that ability while morphed. Jake gives Tobias a string to play with, and Tobias has a hard time controlling himself while he's in cat morph, thus confirming that when they morph into an animal, they also get its instincts. We learn that regular articles of clothing are immune to the morphing process, after Tobias demorphs back to his human form. Later that day, Jake acquires the DNA of his dog, Homer, and morphs into him. Here we learn that animals fall into a trance when they get acquired. Jake's mind is overwhelmed with dog instincts and barks uncontrollably before Tobias snaps him out of it. Jake's older brother Tom comes into his room to tell Homer to stop barking, and meets Tobias for the first time. Jake notices that Tom smells a bit peculiar and sounds just like one of the human controllers at the construction site. After Tom leaves, Jake demorphs and tells the others to meet at Cassie's barn. Also, Tom tells Jake that he quit playing basketball. Marco is reluctant to fight the Yeerks because he lost his mom 2 years ago, and he is all that his father has left. And to be fair, that's a good reason. We soon find out that Cassie acquired and morphed into a horse off-screen. She quickly demorphs, showing that she's already gotten the hang of it. The skin-tight aerobics outfit that she wore survived the morphing process, proving that they only need to worry about loose articles of clothing. Suddenly, a police officer shows up and starts asking questions regarding what happened at the construction site. He claims to be a supervisor at a group called The Sharing and that he knows Tom personally. After he leaves, the kids suspect that he might be a controller. Back at Jake's house, Tom tries to convince Jake and Marco to join The Sharing. Tom leaves the room, and Marco immediately deduces that he must be a controller. And then Jake punches Marco. Marco immobilizes Jake by wrapping bed sheets around him, and as much as Jake hates to admit it, he begins to piece everything together. Between Tom acting strange, the strange scent that Jake noticed while in dog morph, Tom quitting the basketball team, and his voice being heard at the construction site, Jake begins to realize that Marco might actually be onto something. Jake eventually calms down and Marco releases him. Our main character, ladies and gentlemen. Boy, I'd hate to be this guy's family doctor. I'm sorry, son. Your mother has cancer.
Whoosh!
You take that back. Unbelievable. Tobias flies over to Jake's house, morphed as a red-tailed hawk. He mentions how he didn't know true freedom until he took flight. As he demorphs, he explains that he acquired the morph from an injured specimen in Cassie's barn. Here we learn that injuries present in the animal you acquire won't carry over to your morph as long as they were not born that way. Apparently, Elfangor gave Tobias a vision about the Yeerk's feeding cycle before he died. A Yeerk needs to leave its host body every 3 days to soak up Kandrona rays, or they'll starve to death. Kandrona rays are pretty much a miniature version of the sun from the Yeerk homeworld. They all eventually agree to find the Yeerk pool. They start by going to a meeting at the Sharing. While he was talking to Jake, it seems for a moment Tom briefly fought the Yeerk in his head, before it regained control over his body. Tobias morphs into a hawk, and Jake morphs into his dog Homer so they can spy on the full members of the Sharing. After a while, it turns out that another one of the voices that Jake recognized from the construction site was Assistant Principal Chapman. After seeing him speak with Tom, Jake gets official confirmation that his brother is indeed a controller, much to his dismay. Cassie has a brief run-in with the cop from earlier, and he tells her to leave the premises. Later on that night, Jake acquires a green anole that he found in Cassie's barn. The next day at school, Jake morphs into it, which explains Jake morphing into a lizard on the front cover. It doesn't take long for the lizard instincts to overwhelm him and force him to eat a spider. He even got stepped on and lost a tail shortly afterwards. He eventually discovers the entrance to the Yerk pool inside the janitor's closet after following Chapman. Eventually, they all agree to raid the Yerk pool. Marco says they're idiot teens with a death wish and comes up with the team name Animorphs. Ha! He said the title. So the Animorphs pool their money together and visit the gardens so they can acquire bigger animals to fight the Yerks. The gardens is sort of a zoo amusement park hybrid where Cassie's mother works. The kids sneak into various different enclosures. Jake, Marco, and Rachel all acquire their battle morphs. A tiger, a gorilla named Big Jim, and an elephant respectively. Also, did anyone notice that before they go inside of Big Jim's enclosure, the book said that Rachel batted her eyes at Marco? Kinda makes me wonder, was she flirting with him, or am I just overthinking it? Anyway, later on, Cassie gets captured and brought to the Yerk pool by the very same cop that questioned her earlier, thus confirming that he is a controller. I'm not sure why she doesn't morph and try to escape. Then again, I guess her avoiding accusations of being an Andalite bandit takes priority. Then again, even if she did expose herself, she could have just killed him afterwards. You know what? I'll let it slide. For now. Jake, Marco, Tobias, and Rachel go into their battle morphs and start fighting controllers and rescuing free hosts. They save Cassie from getting infested and try to escape, only to encounter Visser 3. Visser 3 morphs into some sort of giant multi-headed creature that shoots fireballs from its mouth. Numerous freed hosts are either burned alive or recaptured, Tom being among the latter. After a brief battle with Visser 3 and various other controllers, they eventually escape except for Tobias. The book ends with Tobias getting stuck in his red-tailed hawk morph after exceeding the 2-hour time limit. Overall, this book was pretty good. It's definitely a great way to kickstart the series. A lot of good bits of foreshadowing, too. And not only are we told the consequences of the 2-hour time limit by Elfangor, it's shown to us taking place in one of the characters. Visser 3 has a great introduction that shows he's a force to be reckoned with, while also giving us a first-hand, albeit horrifying demonstration of how the morphing process works. It also foreshadows how those who have the power to morph can heal from damage. Cassie mentions that they didn't have to worry about the cop that brought her to the Yerk pool. I guess it's safe to assume that he's also dead. She said she didn't want to talk about it, so I'm going to assume he got incinerated. Yeah, that's all we have to go off of. Of course, there's a few irksome moments involving Rachel, and Marco not taking anything seriously was a bit annoying as well. I also didn't like Marco being mean to Tobias. Jake punching Marco for suspecting that Tom might have been a controller was in bad taste, and a terrible trait to have in a leader. Also, it could just be me, but it kind of comes off as if Rachel, being Jake's cousin, is the only reason why he doesn't have a crush on her. I found that kind of creepy. The aliens that we get introduced to are pretty creative. The Andalites do an especially good job of embodying the alien archetype while also being unique in their own right. So, overall, I give this I give this book a 9 out of 10. And that's pretty much it. I'll see you in the next video.